Well, hello, friends. This is Doug Schaible, and welcome again to the Premature Bible Institute. Trust your week has been good. I know we've had some rain here in Kansas, which has been a real blessing, and we're very, very thankful for that. Been dry for quite a while, but it's been good, and so it's been nice to have it and not have to water the lawn or do anything like that. So, just want to talk a little bit about last week's lesson, just kind of a review. We talked about how on day 3, God created the dry land. He caused the dry land to appear. And remember, he moved the waters back. And he says, as a result, the seas and the oceans and the rivers were formed, and he caused the dry land to appear. And like I said before, it doesn't tell us whether the dry land was already there, and because of the moving of the water back, the dry land appeared, or whether he just caused the dry land to appear right then and there. But it really doesn't make any difference. It wasn't there to begin with because God created everything in the universe. So he created the dry land, he caused the seas to come into being, and then later on in the day, after he caused the dry land to appear and everything, then he started causing the vegetation to appear, all the different forms of vegetation that there are. There's trees and grass and plants and all the different things that are there, the fruit, the vegetables, whatever. Anything that was vegetation was created on day 3. And it was so interesting, I think, once again, about how God does everything. When he created all the vegetation, he didn't just create everything just one color. He created every kind of color you can possibly imagine that the human eye can even comprehend. He created all the different aromas of different things, the difference between a rose and a pine tree and so on, and grass and hay and alfalfa and all the different aromas that were out there, he started causing to come into being. Textures of plants between cotton and bark of a tree and everything. So all the different textures that were there, and the sounds of wind as it traveled through trees or grass or wheat or mountains or whatever, all the different sounds, and then of course all the different flavors of things. We know that the spinach tastes a lot different than a peach, which tastes different than apples, which tastes different than bananas, or which tastes different than any other kind of than corn or asparagus or beets or whatever. So all the different types of things that were there, God created all of those things, and they would be good for people. So, but at the end of day 3, he wasn't finished with his creating, so he starts on day 4. Now, we think that's the most wondrous of all. I mean, humans tend to, but really, if you just look around yourself every day and just look at those things and say, wow, what would it take to create a leaf? Just a leaf. It would boggle the mind the amount of complexity involved in just creating a leaf or a blade of grass or anything, pollen even like that. It would. But on day 4, he starts doing something else, and mankind has always been interested in this part. But we start talking about the creation of the heavens and things that we see up there. Now, I know when we look up there, sometimes we just look up at the sky and we say, wow, that is awesome. And it is awesome, but it's kind of we use that word an awful lot. We use awesome to describe almost anything these days. Somebody, puts a piece of, what do you call it, super glue inside of a cut or something and puts the skin back together and say, oh, that's awesome. I'll tell you what, the universe is awesome. It really is. And we look at that and we say, wow, what would it take to do something on that grand of a scale? We look at a leaf and we think, wow, that's really, really impressive that God would do that. And that's just a leaf. But think of the entire universe that God created. A lot has happened in my lifetime. I can remember the very first satellite going into space, which was Sputnik. I was a young kid at that time, but I can remember when that happened. I can remember the first astronaut, the first moon landing. I can still remember the first cell phones that were created, the first computers, laptops, PCs, Macs, all of those things. I can remember when there weren't those things. I can even remember when frisbees were invented and skateboards and bicycles with the big tall handlebars and banana seats and everything that we used. A lot of stuff that I've seen in my lifetime that the average person hasn't today has never seen, the average young person for sure. But those are interesting things, and they're things that man has brought into existence, but he's using stuff that's already there. He's not using anything that isn't there or hasn't been created already beforehand. He's just reforming it and putting it in a different form, kind of like light we talked about on day one. Man learns how to manipulate the light. He takes light and he bends it in a sense, or he puts it, channels it inside of a little cable, a fiber optic cable, and then causes a lot of information to go across that. So man has learned to take what God has already created and use it to his benefit. And I think God was wanting to do that. You know, you sit down and think about all of this stuff that we see today. I wonder what Isaac Newton would have said the first time if he had been blind all of his life and he looks up into the sky and he sees everything up there. He'd say, wow, that's impressive. He probably would have said something like this, and it's in Psalm 19, verses 1 through 4. It says, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork. Day to day pours out speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words whose voice is not heard. Their voice go out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. And basically what it's being said there is that all of creation just screams and yells out, look who created me. The God who created all of this. What is he like? And it tells us a lot about him. And we're going to talk a little about that in this lesson. So we look out into the universe, and the universe itself is a testimony of God himself about what he's done and what he is like. And so it's an amazing thing to watch. Now, when I was growing up, I remember there was the Voyager spacecraft when it was first launched. And its purpose was to go out to the ends of the solar system and see what it could see. And it's amazing that at that particular time in history, it was done in such a way that it could get as much information as it could possibly get. They knew how fast it had to go. And I remember that when Voyager was going past Saturn, all the scientists were just really stunned at what they saw. It blew away all their theories about what Saturn would be like and everything. And I can remember I think it was ABC News one night. There were only 3 networks back then, if you can imagine that. ABC, NBC, and CBS. That's all there was. And I can remember they were interviewing a man who was in charge of that project, of the Voyager project. And they said, he says, now that this is going past Saturn and has really kind of just destroyed a lot of your theories about a lot of different things, what does that tell you? And this guy just sat there and he just kind of nodded and he says, God is complex, isn't he? And see, he admitted, he understood God created all of this. And he admitted it. And he says, God is complex, but he's simple at the same time. So scientists used every single known laws of physics to get Voyager to its intended destination. Let me rephrase that. They used all the laws that they knew about to get Voyager to its intended destination. It used the laws of gravity, of celestial motion, all the different things that are there. They had to use all of those things in order to get it there. Why? And they still do use those, and they always will. Why? Because God doesn't change, and neither do the laws that he put into place change. He made the laws of physics to be the way they are. Man can count on them to be the same all the time. Just like a farmer plans on whatever he plants is what's going to come up the next year. That's the whole point of it. So God doesn't change. He makes things in such a way that man can depend on it to be the same, just like God himself. Now, Genesis 1, verses 14 through 19 says this, and God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night. And let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. And let them be lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light upon the earth. And it was so. And God made the 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. And God set them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the 4th day. So here we have this day, this complete day, day number 4. God decides to create everything up in the heavens that we can see. So he says, let's just go through this just a little bit. It says, and God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night. So during the daytime, generally speaking, we can't see the stars. There's the sun that we can see, and sometimes we can see the moon towards the evening and the morning, but there comes a certain time during the day where we can't even see that. And let them be for lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light upon the earth. And it was so. So God did this. He created all of these celestial beings to give light upon the earth, to help them in guiding themselves on the ocean, for navigation, and so on. And God made the 2 great lights. He talks about the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night. So during the day, God uses the sun, made the sun so it could give us light during the day. And he made the moon so that it could reflect the sun's light during the day and give us light at nighttime, so that we wouldn't walk around in the dark. There have been times in different places, especially like a new moon, where it's dark out there. We were out there in the jungle, and it would be dark, dark, dark. You couldn't see anything. And especially if a fog came in, and you just really could not see the hand in front of your face, and you turn a light on, and the whole thing is like a big, giant filter that just almost blinds you. There's just light everywhere, and it's just reflecting back on you. But the sun was there to give light during the day, and the moon was there to help people at night so they can walk around on trails and do things. And it's also something, kind of a way to remember things. I remember our tribal guys used to say that whenever they saw a full moon, it made them think of things elsewhere, places they've been, people they've met. It was kind of a reminder, a signpost of where they have been and what they have done. And I thought about that a lot over the years. That is a pretty good way of saying it. I know every time I look up at a brand new moon, or not a new moon, but a full moon, I always think about our time out in the tribe, sitting there talking with the guys out in front of the house, and we had clover on the ground there. And we just sit there and talk and drink coffee and talk about the day's events or whatever was going on. And we just look up at the moon and see that. And it always reminds me of that also. So it's kind of the same thing. Now, I want you to notice something here. It says, the greater light to rule the day, lesser light to rule the night. It says, and the stars. Now, it's interesting, isn't it, that he talks about them as separate. The sun, the moon, the stars. So he created those, and he names them separately. And so that also means that they have to be separate from the earth. And so God created them at that particular time. Now, the sun, the moon, and the stars, like I said, were created on day 4. And it tells us that when God speaks, things happen. And so that's what he did. God says that the earth existed before the sun, the moon, and the stars. It was around for 3 full days before the sun, the moon, the stars were created. Now, if the earth was part of a cosmic explosion, then why would God say he created the heavens and the earth? Why didn't he say, you see, he names them in separate categories, the heavens and the earth. And so that kind of tells us that the earth is something unique. And it is unique. It is special. It is set apart from the rest of the universe. And that's kind of an interesting thing. Remember in an earlier lesson, I talked about how God is unique. He is in a category all his own. And in the same way, when he created the earth, he made the earth in a category all its own. It isn't that it isn't part of the universe, but it is unique. It is special. Why? Because God was doing something here that he wasn't doing anywhere else. And he decided to do it. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So the earth is something that he puts on an equality or a uniqueness to everything else. The universe is called, the heavens is everything that's up there, but the earth is unique. He refers to it in the singular. So when people like Kepler and Newton and Copernicus and Galileo, when they looked into the heavens, you know what they saw? They saw order. They saw symmetry. They saw non-chaos. So they looked up there and they said, wow, that's impressive. And they're with their some of them with their bare eyes started mapping out the universe and the stars and everything. And then when they got telescopes, they could get even farther out there and map even further and see different things that they hadn't. So God is a God of laws and order, and the smallest part of the universe, atoms and quarks and all this stuff, has something that's in common with the rest of the universe. And you know what that is? Order, symmetry, and chaos. I'm sorry, non-chaos. That was a real Freudian slip, wasn't it? So the whole idea was here that God, he made things non-chaotic. Why? Because he is not chaotic. He makes things order because he is an orderly God. He orders the symmetry because there's a symmetry to the whole thing that he's doing. So when people looked in microscopes and they saw everything they could see, they just saw order. They saw things happening the way they were supposed to, and they repeated themselves. And then they get into electron microscopes, and they get down to where they can almost, I'm not even sure, they probably can, but to see atoms. And guess what they don't do? They don't run into each other. Of all the things in the universe you would think would run into each other, atoms, they don't, because God has built them in that way. So God is a God of laws and order, and the smallest part of the universe has something in common with the largest, and it has a designer. And that just screams out design. God made things happen. I mean, if you saw a line, a scratch in a stone in a cave somewhere, you would think, okay, maybe it's a scratch. And if you saw two scratches, you would think, okay. And if you saw four of them and they were all about the same equidistance from each other, then you start seeing a pattern. But then if you saw one that goes across that way and you say, oh, that symbolizes 5, then you know somebody did that. There was order. There was non-chaos. There was a design in that. And then if you see that separated from another set that looks just like it, and another set, and another set, and another set, well, then you know that somebody was counting something, probably days. So those are things that are there. And Isaiah 44:24 says this, "Thus says the Lord, your Redeemer, who formed you from the womb. I am the Lord who made all things, who alone stretched out the heavens, who spread out the earth by myself." He didn't say anybody else did it. He said he himself did it. He not only spread out the heavens, he also spread out the earth. And so he is the one that has designed it. He is the designer. So God did all that. Now, God knows everything and sees everything. We talked about that because he is omnipresent. He's omniscient. He knows everything there is to know. Jeremiah 23, verses 23 and 24 says this, Am I a God at hand, declares the Lord, and not a God far away? Can a man hide himself in secret places so that I cannot see him, declares the Lord? Do I not fill heaven and earth, declares the Lord. So there we are. We have that heaven and earth once again. But God is just saying there isn't anywhere I'm not. Like I told you before, that little girl that said God is so big that he doesn't have to go anywhere. And that's true. And God not going anywhere is just like God being eternal. There isn't any time he hasn't been either. He's there all the time. The beginning, the end are alike to him. He's there. God doesn't go anywhere, doesn't have to be anywhere. He is there. That is what he is. So God's not subject to our interpretation of who he is. And that's the thing we have to remember about God. God is God. Whoever he is all of the time to an infinite degree. We don't have the right to define God. God defines himself because he is the omniscient, omnipotent, perfect one who cannot lie. So we have to let him define himself. I had a teacher of mine in Bible school. He was a missionary in China back in the 30s and 40s and 50s and stuff. And he said this, he said, God is not bound by our interpretation of the scriptures. He's only bound by his character. So whoever God is, whatever God is, he is all of the time to an infinite degree. But he is the one who defines himself. He is the ultimate reality. And God interprets that reality by himself because he's the only reality there is. Everything else interprets that reality. But God is the reality. So he interprets himself. Everything else tries to interpret him, even myself included. What's what I'm doing with these lessons. I'm trying to the best of my degree, best of my ability, without any malice or forethought, if you want to put it that way, trying to share who God is in a way that he would want to be shared or explained. And if I make a mistake, it's on me, not on God. So that's your job, is to read these scriptures and see what God has to say about himself. The Creator is infinite, and the created is finite. So God is infinite, you and I are finite, and we cannot be compared with the infinite. You and I can have well, we'll talk more about that later. But so as the finite, we have to let the infinite define everything that is finite, because he created the finite, so to speak. Jeremiah 10:12 says this, "It is he who made the earth by his power, who established the world by his wisdom, and by his understanding stretched out the heavens." So God himself is the one that pulled all of this out there. He's the one that defines all of that. So God, when he created different things. He created laws, different types of laws. God created the law of gravity. He created the laws of planetary motion. He created the earth and all the celestial bodies' rotation around whatever it is they rotate around. In our case, it's the sun. He created Halley's Comet. He created meteor showers. He created the moon's gravitational pull on tides and seasons, the different seasons he created. God, these are laws that God brought into existence, and we know when they are. I know the difference between summer and spring and winter and fall. I know the difference between all of those. And I know about, now we have a particular day in our calendar where we set those apart, what they are, but we know that the seasons, when they are, we know when winter is winter and when summer is summer. And fall and spring we also know too. Just, we can feel it, for one thing. God made it so we could. So, and then Psalm 104 verses 19 says this, "He made the moon to mark the seasons. The sun knows its time for setting." So the sun has a time to go down every day, has a time to come up every day, and it changes because of the way the universe is created. And but it's we can predict it. That's what I mean by it doesn't change. We can predict when the sun will come up 10 years from now. We just can. And also with the same way with the moon. We know when the moon's going to rise. We know when the tides are coming in. All of this is because God is a God of laws and order. God's creation is a revelation of who he is. It tells us he's orderly. He's all-powerful. He knows everything there is to know. He's good. He's perfect. He's everywhere at the same time. And he never, ever changes. That's because that's who God is. Psalm 18, verse 30, and also the same thing is said in 2 Samuel 22, verse 31. It says, "This God, his way is perfect. The word of the Lord proves true." So it says that God is perfect. That means there is no, and this is really important to understand. If God is perfect, then there are no do-overs. There are no, God doesn't start something out and say, "Oh, I made a mistake on that," or "I forgot something." He does everything right the first time. So there is no, like I say, there's no do-overs, there are no trial and error. That's what I was trying to say. There is no trial and error with God. God does it right the first time, every time, no matter what it is he's doing. When man sent the Mars rover to the surface of Mars, most of you weren't around for this, some of you were. But we sent a Mars rover to, this thing that could go on Mars, the surface, and move around and gather data. And when it went, it worked for a week, and then it broke. And it took them a while. They fixed it, and they were able to do that. They were able to get it fixed. But how much trial and error went into the development of this vehicle before it even went up there? Yes, we got it fixed, but see, they were building in the ability to fix it. Why? Because they assumed that it could break. And so they knew that it wasn't going to be a perfect vehicle. But just to get it there, think of how many rockets, fuel mixtures, metallic compositions, and computers in human history had to fail and be redesigned before they got this right. A lot. How much money do you think was spent to do that? Man operates by trial and error, but God doesn't. He always works right. SpaceX, which is that new rocket that goes into space and then re-lands and everything like that, they're hoping to use that. And a guy just put his own Tesla on board that thing just to show how much he has confidence in it. That took a lot of confidence to put his Tesla car on there. But anyway, he did that. All of us, we go to a NASCAR race or whatever. People love to see car crashes. They don't want to see anybody get hurt, but they love to watch the crashes. But if that is what we are looking for, we will be disappointed. Let me see. We want to see the crash because it's just exciting to watch. But what is crash if not trial and error, or if it's a mistake or an error, a lack of understanding on the forces of the wind and slipstreams and so on, or how much power a vehicle has? All of that is built. An entire race is built on the idea of not. Well, it's put on the idea. It is built with the idea of who makes the fewest mistakes, with the most horsepower. That's how a race is won. Let's see. We want to see these things happen. We want to see a winner, but we just don't want to see anything happen like Dale Earnhardt when he got killed and so on. Perfection. How long has the universe been operating without man's interference? It's been going on ever since the beginning. It just keeps going on and on and on, and it just keeps running. Why? Because God created that. And we'll talk more about why we see things that don't look like they're perfect. That's in future lessons, and we'll get to that. But there's moons that circle planets, planets that circle suns, solar systems circle galaxies, and galaxies circles who knows what. That is God for you. That is God for you. God sets things in motion, and they work every time, the right time. How many times do you think it took for God to create a perfect universe? Well, just once. That's all it ever takes for God to do it. He did things each day, but he did things for a reason. And the angels are probably looking at this and wondering, what's going on here, They saw the first 3 days. Remember we talked about how he created light, the air, the dry land, and then all of a sudden the vegetation, and thought, wow. Now we know why all these things were created before the vegetation. The plants couldn't have lived without water, air, light, and dirt. But now we see the sun, the moon, the stars are being brought into existence, and going to learn a couple more things about God from that. I want to read to you a couple of scriptures to show you that people of old times were not as ignorant as we think. Sometimes we think we're very, very advanced, but let's just get something. Here's people who had as far as we know, had no ability to know anything except what they observed. In Job 26:7, it says this: He stretches out the north over the void and hangs the earth on nothing. Now think about that. What would a person have to understand to say that the earth hangs on nothing? I mean, that you just think about it. It's true. It is an absolutely true statement. But how could he know that? Because he understood who God was. Isaiah 40 verse 22 says, It is he who sits above the circle of the earth. So where do we get the idea that the earth was round? It certainly didn't come from after the time of with Columbus. It was here we have thousands of years before Columbus, and he's talking about that God sits upon the circle of the earth, sits above it. So already way back then they're talking about in Isaiah. So they already knew it. These people were probably the smartest people that have ever lived that walked at that time, because they lived in the earlier days before the flood. They lived for hundreds of years, and there's probably a lot of information they could have gotten that amount of time. So, and this is pretty interesting for people who are just supposed to be shepherds, weren't it? That they knew all these things. So why would God do all of this creating? What is it that would motivate him to do that? What was the point? That we're going to discuss some more as time goes on. So I just want to say thank you guys so much for listening to these lessons. Keep on pressing on. And like I said, if you have any friends, get them on here, get them subscribed. And whenever I put out a new lesson, it'll automatically go to them. Just remember, you can search for it on your favorite audio podcast. Just look up Premature Bible Institute and you'll find it. And if you're listening to the video podcast on YouTube, just look up my name, Doug Schaible, Doug, and then Schaible. two different words. Take care. We'll talk to you next week. Bye.